is an obligatory function of not only government departments, but also all the universities, educational institutions, even the private firms and companies under the Disaster Management Act 2005. So we have Disaster Management Act 2005, which is implemented across the country in all the states. So we must know the responsibilities, obligations under the Disaster Management Act 2005, what we are supposed to do and what we should not do. So this is there in the Act also. I would like to brief all of you, since you are all freshers to this whole area. If I could ask some of you, if you are aware of the legal provisions in the Disaster Management Act 2005, and then I will continue accordingly. So anybody is aware of the legal framework under the Disaster Management Act? Because that is the basis for disaster management in India and in every department and every institution. If I could ask anybody, Vijay Lakshmi or somebody, you can unmute, and I may be asking some questions in between. Kindly be alert, because there may be some questions coming frequently to all of you after the briefing, after making some brief presentation, because interactive mode is always good. It will help us to learn and also learning from each other. Is that okay to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So are you aware of the legal provisions under the Disaster Management Act, anybody? Or if you are not aware, we'll start from there. Is that okay?
Okay, sir.
So I'll go to the next slide. So what is disaster management? First of all, we have Disaster Management Act 2005, wherein there are 11 chapters and 79 sections. So we will discuss briefly about all these 11 chapters and provisions little later, before defining the Disaster Management Act. I would like to tell you that there is a disaster management cycle which consists of stages before, during, and after the disaster, what we are supposed to do. So let me define what is disaster management to start with. This is the definition that has been taken from the Disaster Management Act 2005 only. It is a continuous and integrated process of planning, organizing, coordinating, and implementing measures which are necessary for the prevention, mitigation, capacity building, preparedness, response, and even loss and damage assessment. Finally, the important stages after the disaster, like evacuation, relief, and rescue, search and rescue, and finally the last stages, rehabilitation and reconstruction. So if you divide these important points into three stages, that is pre-disaster, during the disaster, and post-disaster. The disaster management is inclusive of all the three stages. And what are our responsibilities as a government officer, as the university, as an educational institution, as a private body, or as a department in the government, both central and state governments? What we must do is very, very important, because pre-disaster activities like preparedness, mitigation, and prevention are as important as the post-disaster activities like search and rescue, relief, evacuation, recovery, loss and damage assessment, and finally rehabilitation and reconstruction. So at every stage, we are supposed to know what are my responsibilities, what are my do's and don'ts. If you are not aware, there will be more losses and damages and which we have ended up in many earlier disasters like Lathur earthquake, Bhuj earthquake, super cyclone 99, and many disasters like floods in Karnataka, Kerala, even North India, landslides that are happening every year in North India as well as in Karnataka and other Kerala and other states. So we are facing a lot of disasters in the recent years. And if you are aware that in 2020 alone, there were about 389 hydrometeorological disasters as compared to the last 20 years, which recorded only about 250 to 280 disaster events. So what is the reason for this? They are attributing to the climate change, global warming, and many other developmental activities, and therefore natural disasters like flood, cyclone, heat waves, cold waves, fire incidents are happening more and more in the recent years. Now, I have defined what is disaster management. Now, I would like to take you to the legal framework that is there in the Disaster Management Act 2005. All of you must know what are your obligations under the provisions of the Act, because violations of the provisions of the Act given in the Disaster Management Act would attract penalties, and it would amount to the offences committed by the officers or anybody who is heading the educational institution, universities, or even private companies under the Act. So let me give you some light on the provisions of the Disaster Management Act 2005. So in India, we had no legal framework before 2005. So we didn't have any act or any legal framework in India. Some states had their own acts, but they were not uniformly implemented, and there were some confusions, and therefore there were more losses and damages, and obligations, etc., were not fixed on the officers, and abruptly or occasionally or only haphazardly they were managing the disasters, and there were no efforts of disaster mitigation, prevention, and preparedness. And therefore, this act has come into picture in India after a detailed study research by the group of empowered officials, like we call it as High Powered Committee in 99, which went across the country, across the globe, like America, USA, Japan, Australia, and some other developed countries, how the disaster management is being done there. They have done some research. Came back to India. They have given recommendations to the government of India, saying that such best practices that are followed in USA, Australia, Japan, etc., need to be implemented in India also. And therefore, one of the suggestions was implementation of this Disaster Management Act 2005 itself in India. Therefore, this act came into enforcement in 2005 across the country in all the states. And in the first chapter, in the first chapter of the Disaster Management Act, I will be asking some questions in this. Please be attentive. In the first chapter, there are terminologies. So, what do you mean by disaster, hazard, risk, vulnerabilities, mitigation, preparedness, prevention, recovery, loss and damage, reconstruction and rehabilitation. If you know these terminologies, almost you have understood the disaster management itself. So let me start with what is hazard. Before we define disaster, we must know what is hazard. Hazard means anything that is posing danger to all of us, and to the properties, and to the environment, and to the infrastructure that are there. So hazards, if they are there in and around us, we are going to face danger. So such hazards can be originated from water, it can be due to climate, it can be also due to geological conditions, it can also be due to chemical industries, nuclear industries, or any other industries that are posing hazardous chemicals. It can also be due to accidents, it can also be due to building collapses, it can be due to any festival related events or mass gatherings, etc. Sometimes it can also happen due to biological or biological considerations also, like diseases, COVID-19 kind of diseases. Okay, so now we have understood the hazard. Hazard is can be dangerous. Sometimes it can convert itself into a real danger. Once it is ignored, neglected by the community, it can cause a real danger. That real danger is nothing but disaster. So what do you mean by disaster now? How are you going to define disaster? Disaster can be any calamity, catastrophe, simply a mishap arising out of natural or man-made causes, or by negligence, or by accident, resulting in large-scale loss of life, damage and destruction to the properties, degradation of environment, and is of such a nature which is beyond the coping capacity of the local community of the affected area. You might have understood now, as I was just giving this particular statement, you can still find out some differences in different definitions. Some people say a sudden event leading to large scale loss of life and damage to the properties. That is also definition of the disaster, but what I just defined is the definition given in the Disaster Management Act 2005 in the chapter number 1. So you need to remember this definition. There is one distinguishing feature in this definition. What is that? If the local community of that area are not in a position, are not having the capacity to manage that particular disaster event, then that event can be considered as disaster. It means if they are capable of managing the event without depending on the support from the higher level governments, then it cannot fit to be defined as disaster. Hope you understood the difference in the disaster the definition given in the Disaster Management Act, and people generally define the disaster. Okay, so this is the definition given in the Disaster Management Act 2005. So based on this definition, based on this distinguishing feature, they have classified the disasters into 3 stages or the 3 levels. The level 1 type of disasters are confined to the local levels and they depend on the support from the district administration. Then such disasters can be level 1 type of disasters. In the level 2 type of disasters, their area of influence will be little higher and they would depend on the support from the state government. And third level of disasters are declared when the support is required from the national and international bodies. Now you have understood the 3 levels of disasters based on the support needed by the higher level governments. Hope you understood the definition of disasters and 3 levels of disasters based on the support needed. Now I would like to define what is vulnerability. Can anybody tell what is vulnerability to the disaster? If there is a hazard, there will definitely one day a disaster. For example, if there is a human habitat around the exactly around the river, which is demarcated as floodplain, still we have gone ahead with construction of houses. That particular area is already a hazard. Because of that hazard, we have vulnerability. Now you define what is vulnerability. Vulnerabilities can be social vulnerability, environmental vulnerability, economic vulnerability. It can also be physical vulnerability and so on and so forth. Now I request you to define what is vulnerability to the disaster. I told you, if there is a hazard, there is a disaster. If there is a disaster, there is going to be a vulnerabilities of different types. Now I request you to define what is vulnerability. Vulnerability means susceptibility to the disaster risk. Susceptibility to the disaster risk means certain community in that area may be more vulnerable as compared to others. For instance, people who are living exactly in the coastal belt or on the banks of the river or in the vicinity of the hill are more vulnerable to disasters as compared to others. Those who are living exactly in the coastal belt will be vulnerable to tsunami, cyclone, coastal erosion, and similarly those who are living exactly in the hilly terrain are more likely to be affected by landslides. And those who are living in the river banks are more likely to be affected by floods. So sometimes we call it as social vulnerability. What do you mean by social vulnerability? For example, in the city or in a village, if they are living in the low-lying areas, so they are more vulnerable to flooding. In the same building, multi-story building, there are some people who are not able to walk, persons with disabilities, aged, women, children, they may be more vulnerable as compared to others. In the same university or college, some students who are persons with disabilities, teachers with disabilities, or some people who are having morbidities, health issues, are more vulnerable as compared to others to different types of disasters, to the impact of different disasters. So this is called social vulnerability. What is physical vulnerability? Physical vulnerability by the virtue of their location. If they're located on the bank of the river in a city where there is a likely that there is going to be accidents, so physically they are located in vulnerable areas, therefore they are more vulnerable. That is physical vulnerability. Similarly, economic vulnerability, environmental vulnerability, and so on and so forth. We can keep defining them. So I just told you what is vulnerability now. Now I request all of you to define risk. What is risk? Disaster risk? Can anybody give some light on that? One of you? I told you hazard. What is hazard?
It's the problem caused by the disaster.
You said
State
something.
of,
It is not audible. Please be little louder, sir.
Sir, the gravity of the problem which has been anticipated with the, whatever the disaster is.
So let us be little more professional definition. Let us have some more professional thinking on that. Disaster risk is directly proportional to hazard and vulnerability exposure and inversely proportional to capacity. Do you agree with this? Anybody? I will repeat again. Disaster risk
yes, sir.
is directly proportional to the hazard, vulnerabilities, and exposure, and inversely proportional to capacity. Hope you understood this statement. Now I'll redefine it again. What
Yes,
is
sir.
risk? Is the sum total of, or in other words, it is a measure of losses and damages in a disaster. Now you understood. Risk means loss and damage.
Yes, sir.
Damage, in simple words. Now, a disaster will cause losses and damages. We call it as disaster risk. Now I put it in a empirical formula. Disaster risk is directly proportional to hazard into vulnerability into exposure and whole divided by capacity. Do you agree with this or no? Anyone of you?
Agreed, sir.
Yes, sir.
So,
Agreed, sir.
disaster risk increases with increase in the hazard,
Vulnerability exposure.
and exposure, and decreases with increase in the
Capacity.
very nice. Decreases with increase in the capacity. Therefore, you can draw a conclusion that disaster risk reduction can be taken up by increasing the capacity every year in all the educational institutions, universities, schools, departments, and various local bodies, like municipalities, right from Gram Panchayats, etc. So that is what is we are doing in our institution now in ATI Mysore. What we are doing is we have started the preparedness plan, mitigation plan, prevention plan, response plan at every Gram Panchayat, at every municipality, district, and even at the state level. We have been preparing disaster management plans at every level and submitting it to the government, both state and central government. And we are suggesting certain recommendations like how the preparedness should be, what should be the mitigation measures, both structural and non-structural, how the prevention activities can be taken up by the local community, by the local bodies, and how the recovery has to be immediately initiated, and finally rehabilitation and reconstruction. So all these stages we are preparing the plan and we are submitting it to the government. Okay. So these are some of the terminologies that I have just defined for the sake of all of you. If you do not know these terms, it will be difficult for you to understand the subsequent thing. Therefore, I defined it. Now I request you to just tell me what is capacity. Risk you are defined. Capacity means ability to manage. Okay.
Relativity of people or organizations.
So capacity in an university means to manage the disaster, particularly the trained manpower. If you have got any facilities like stretchers, ropes, fire extinguishers, boats, life jackets, and all the teams for being formed, first aid team, search and rescue team, fire extinguishing team, and if you know the contact addresses of the different agencies who are coming and rescuing the people, and if you know the support that is required for managing the disaster in the universities and colleges, if you have got everything of this kind, if you are prepared for all these important capacities, then you are reducing the disaster risk and you are prepared for the disaster. So preparedness for the disaster depends on the capacity you have developed. So we are preparing preparedness plan, I told you just now, at the Gram Panchayat and other levels. What is mitigation? One more term. Disaster mitigation, anybody? Please speak, some of you, otherwise the subject is, unless you discuss, you will not be able to do justice. Someone please speak, what is disaster
It's an
mitigation?
action taken.
Disaster
It's an action taken.
What for? Disaster mitigation means you are taking measures to reduce the disaster risk. Okay.
Yes, sir.
It can be structural risk,
Yes.
structural risk. It can also be non-structural risk reduction. What do you mean by structural risk reduction? Structural mitigation. In a structural mitigation, suppose your building is not safe, your college is not safe. There are some cracks, major cracks, and it is seeping. Seepage is there. So what do you do then? We are going to investigate the building and see whether building can withstand the heavy rainfall, floods, cyclones, etc., earthquakes, etc. If it is not going to withstand the forces like these disasters risk, then we take up the retrofitting. What do you mean by retrofitting? Retrofitting is strengthening of the existing buildings like bridges, dams, educational institutions, multi-story buildings, which are not safe. They are constructed, but they are found to be unsafe. In such cases, we take up retrofitting measures, re-strengthening measures to make those buildings stronger against the disaster risk. For example, earthquake resistant buildings. So if the building is unsafe against the earthquake risk, then we make it as earthquake resistant building by providing retrofitting measures. Extra steel, extra jacketing, uh, strengthening of the foundation, pillars, etc., etc. Okay, so that is called as structural mitigation. What do you mean by non-structural mitigation? Non-structural mitigation means any early warning systems that you are having, like radars, even simple as we announce the disaster dangers to the community through loudspeakers, do's and don'ts, about the do's and don'ts. We also conduct a lot of competitions in the universities, colleges about the disasters. like drawing competition. Sometimes we also do some dramas to take place. One prepare some plans, building bylaws, implement about the awareness about the building bylaws, building codes, fire safety, do's and don'ts in the COVID-19 like pandemic, epidemic, etc. So all these activities come under the non-structural mitigation. Now you understood what is mitigation, what is preparedness. Now, what is prevention in a disaster? These three things comes before the disaster: prevention, mitigation, preparedness. Prevention means, suppose if you avoid constructing houses exactly on the floodplain, then we have prevented the disaster. Suppose there is a road. There is some spot on the road where every year frequently accidents are happening. How are you going to avoid these accidents in that particular spot? By constructing a wall or by realigning the road. So if we do this, we prevent the disasters. So I just told you one or two examples. Similarly, we can give hundreds of such examples for prevention. So prevention, preparedness, mitigation, these three stages are pre-disaster stages. Okay. So now under the terminology here, you have understood almost all the terminologies now. Okay. I have already defined all the terminologies of what are there in the pre-disaster stages. Anybody want to speak? So there are post-disaster terminologies also. What are those? Search and rescue, relief, evacuation, recovery, loss and damage assessment, rehabilitation, reconstruction. So these stages come under the post-disaster terminology. Okay, we will define little later, but these are the basic terminologies that are given in the Disaster Management Act 2005. So you need to know them properly. Now, what is this institutional framework in Disaster Management Act? We have at the district level, District Disaster Management Authority, which is the empowered body in the district for all stages of disaster management. So it is headed by the Deputy Commissioner or the District Collector of the district with not more than 7 members at present here in Karnataka, and they say that in the act not more than 9 members in the body authority, like SP, CEO of the Jilla Panchayat, Joint Director of Agriculture, Executive Engineer of the Jilla Panchayat, City Corporation Commissioner, Additional Deputy Commissioner. So these are the people, even District Health Officer also. They are there in the District Disaster Management Authority in the district. So this is the most empowered body in the district for all types of disasters. They can take all actions against the violations, against those who are not implementing the Disaster Management Act provisions. So that is the most important authority in the district. So we have also local authorities below the District Disaster Management Authority, like municipalities, gram panchayats. They have been also empowered under the provisions of the Act in chapter number 6 of the Disaster Management Act. So it is also there. We have, after the district authority, state authority is also there, State Disaster Management Authority, which is headed by the Chief Minister and other ministers, assisted by State Executive Committee under the chairmanship of Chief Secretary of the state government. So these two bodies at the state level will formulate state plan, state disaster management policy, and they allocate the funds to the districts, give guidelines to all the district administrations and local bodies and departments for preparation of the plans, etc., policies. So this is the job of the even funds release also. They will do at the state level, State Disaster Management Authority. Under the chapter number above this, we have got National Disaster Management Authority also, which is headed by the Prime Minister of India with other members. Not more than 9 members are there in each of these authorities, assisted by National Executive Committee with a nodal department, Ministry of Home Affairs at the national level. So this is the institutional framework in India for managing the disasters. And under the state government, under the district administration, district authority, all of us will come under, like educational institutions, community-based organizations, all the departments in the district will come under the district authority, and we are all supposed to work there during any disaster. So they will be called actually, university professors will be called, educational institution teachers will be called, headmasters will be called. So they are supposed to work in a team before, during, and after the disasters. So that is the job of all of us under the Act. Unwillingness to do the job in a disaster would attract punishment, chapter number 51 to 60, section number 51 to 60 in the disaster management. Okay, we have section number 61, for example, there shall be no discrimination on the grounds of caste, creed, religion during the disaster, during, before, and after the disaster. They have very clearly mentioned. Similarly, section number 65, the DC or the district authority can seek anybody support in the district. Like, universities, if they ask university to come and help, they should go, all the people. If they want some support, like, vehicle, etc., water for extinguishing, etc., they should give. They should not say no, whether it is private university or government university, whatever it may be. Whether it is private company or government company, whether it is a mall, whether it is anything it may be. So they should give their resources on the demand by the government, that is district disaster management authority. That is given in the section number 65 of the Disaster Management Act. Section number 65 and 66 both are there. Okay. So section number 69, they said there is a delegation of powers. District authority can delegate power to any other officer who can manage the disaster. So like that, there are many sections, 51 to 60, offenses and penalties there. Offenses and penalties under 51 to 60. Just note that, section number 51 to 60 deals with offenses and penalties. So, for example, unwillingness to do job in the disaster would attract penalty. They can be imprisoned for a period of 1 year. Suppose if they do not do, if anybody is obstructing, putting barriers to the officials who are working in a disaster site, like protest, strikes, etc., they will all be punished under the disaster management up to 1 year of imprisonment and fine. Suppose if due to the barriers, due to the obstructions created by those people, if any death happens, loss of life happens, then it will extend beyond 2 years. The punishment will go beyond 1 year, 2 years, like up to 3 years also. That is what is being given in the Act. Okay. So like that, there are 51 to 60 provisions are there. Like, if somebody is misutilizing the funds given for disaster management, relief, and etc., then they will be imprisoned. They can be imprisoned for a period of 2 years. Those officers. Similarly, if somebody claims compensation by giving wrong documents, false documents, they can also be imprisoned for a period of 2 years. So sometimes some people are spreading wrong, false rumors about the disasters unnecessarily. Those who are spreading such false rumors will will attract 1 year of imprisonment for them. Okay. So these are some of the penalties, offences and penalties are there in the Act. Lastly, this fund is very, very important. Section number 46 to 50, chapter number 9 provides for funds. One is mitigation fund, other one is response fund. So you can also claim this fund. It is there in the state account. There are two accounts are there, one mitigation fund account and another is response fund account. Government of India under the 15th Finance Commission, that is from 2000, it is up to 2006 now. It's going 2002 to 2006. It started in the year 2002 and it is ending in 2006. For these 5 years, they have given about 1.62 lakh crores of money to the states, under which every state is giving given funds for both mitigation as well as response. So the state will release funds to the district administrations for managing the disasters. So, for example, if there is a loss of crop in irrigated area or rain-fed area, they will give for rain-fed area for a 2 hectares of land, 17,500 rupees for the loss of crop. Similarly, for rain-fed area, it is about 8,500 rupees. Like that, there are response fund is being utilized for different losses and damages. Suppose completely house is damaged, then 2 lakh rupees. Partially damaged, similar 2 lakhs, like that. So funds are given for different types of activities, both for the response as well as mitigation. So funds like there is a state disaster risk mitigation, there is a state mitigation fund, there is a state risk fund, just like national mitigation fund, national disaster mitigation fund, national disaster response fund. Okay, both at the central level and at the state level we have mitigation fund as well as response funds. Central government is releasing funds regularly to the state governments and state governments are releasing regularly to the district authorities for managing disasters. So I told you about the funds availability for managing the disasters in India by the government. In addition to the government funds which are given in the 15th Finance Commission, we can also have other funds like mobilized funds from the CSR, from donations, and from community, etc. That can also be done. Okay, under the Act. So this is what, in a nutshell, the Disaster Management Act 2005 is having. Okay, so I already told you what are all your responsibilities under the Act. So by the provisions of the Act, if you violate these provisions, you are also punishable under the Act. So you need to know about it. Okay. Now let me move forward. You have any doubts in this? Anybody? Anybody would like to ask questions at this stage about the Disaster Management Act?
Yeah, sir. Regarding funds, sir, released by the government.
Hello?
Sir, am I audible, sir?
Yeah, now
Hello?
you're audible.
Am I
Please.
audible, sir?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So regarding the fund released by the central government, sir, is the same amount is going to be released for all the states or what?
Yes, I told you now about 1.2 lakh crore rupees is earmarked under the 15th Finance Commission for disaster management. That fund is given to all the states depending on the vulnerability of the particular state. For example, Karnataka is given every year about 300 crore rupees for mitigation. Kerala is given similarly some amount. Gujarat is given about 400 to 500 crore rupees every year for mitigation. Different states are given different amount of funds based on their vulnerabilities to different types of disasters. Notified disasters, they have given about 60% fund allocation. Local disaster, 10% allocation. And remaining 30% is given for poverty. Poverty depend, like Karnataka is having less poverty as compared to Bihar. Ultimately, based on the formula, we get less funds as compared to Bihar and Odisha. So those who are having more poverty, they will get more money in that 30% ratio. And if they have got more notified disaster like flood, cyclone, drought, landslides, then they will get more funds. Okay. So depending on the vulnerability of the state, the government of India has already made a formula to distribute the funds to all the states. Every year, all states are getting funds depending on their vulnerability and formula. Karnataka is getting something like,
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
during these 5 years, 1,165 crore for mitigation. It's like Kerala is getting about 1,700 crore rupees in these 5 years, like that. Every state is getting the funds. Okay. So the funds are decided by the 15th Finance Commission, Central Finance Commission. Now the 16th Central Finance Commission is already formed. So they are also deciding, and we have given some certain suggestions also to the Finance Commission for making available the available funds based on the micro vulnerabilities in the state. Okay. Next we will go now. So what are the types of
Yes,
disasters?
sir.
You must know what are the types of disasters. Can anybody tell what are the different types of disasters? We can classify disasters into 5 categories. Can anybody tell one first category, second category, or anything?
Geographical disaster, sir.
Very good. So you can say water and climate related disasters.
Natural disaster.
Broadly, they can be classified into natural disasters and man-made disasters. Natural and human-induced disasters or anthropological disasters. Under this, we have water and climate-related disasters like cyclone, drought, etc. Under the geological disaster, again, they are natural disasters, which are earthquake, landslides, etc. Then we have third one category is biological disasters like epidemic and pandemic situations, chikungunya, dengue, etc. And fourth type of disaster is chemical, industrial, and nuclear. Like Bhopal gas tragedy happened earlier, and many oil spill things are happening in the sea and rivers. Then all kinds of fire incidents. Last one is accident-related disasters. So other than these 4 categories, whatever the disaster it may be, it can include it in the accident-related disasters. It can be building collapse, it can be accident, it can be anything related to terrorist activities or Naxalite activities or anything of that kind. So all of those festival-related disasters, building collapse, can be included in the 5th category. So Government of India in 1999 has classified disasters into 5 categories. This classification includes 5 groups of disasters. Hope all of you have understood this. And for all these 5 groups of disasters, we are preparing with a responsibility matrix, district disaster management plan, Grama Panchayati disaster management plan, state disaster management plan, and national disaster management plan. Already we have prepared it and we are revising every year in Karnataka as well as in other states. Hope you are clear now. Even at the departmental levels also we have prepared 16 department plans. Education department comes under that, higher education, where your all universities and colleges are coming under that. Okay. Now we'll go to the cycle, disaster management cycle. It is a cycle actually. Disaster management cycle starts with search and rescue, platinum 10 minutes, golden hour. You must know about this. Platinum 10 minutes, for example, there is a drowning. Some students are drowned. What is the immediate first aid? CPR. Sometimes CPR means cardiopulmonary resuscitation. If you do not know cardiopulmonary resuscitation, that is 30 compressions followed by 2 breathings, then the person will die. Therefore, I said platinum 10 minutes are very, very important soon after the disaster. Whether it may be drowning, whether it may be building collapse, whether it may be heart issues or any other accidents. So one should know CPR, one should know how to give first aid like bandage, one should know how to take the patients to the hospital if the spinal cord is injured, if the head is injured, like that. If we do not know, then deaths will be more. What is there after that? Search and rescue. So many people will be trapped in the building. We need to rescue them and take them to the safer places. So that should be done within 1 hour. That is golden hour. Next is relief. Once you evacuate them, search and rescue them and evacuate them to the safer place or evacuation, we call them as relief shelters. So where you take relief management like food, medicines, water, sanitation, everything, boarding, lodging activities. So that is called as relief management, which can take place depending on the type of disaster, maybe 3 weeks. That is the time. Next is recovery. What do you mean by recovery? So once the disaster happens like earthquake or flood, most of the roads, most of the schools, electricity, water supply gets disrupted, damaged. Then what should you do? In a team, search and rescue team or recovery team, they should go there, immediately recover, restore the facilities. Like water supply should be restored immediately within 24 hours. Schools and educational institutions should be restored within 24 hours. Electricity should be restored within 1 hour, 2 hours. Health facilities like hospitals should be restored within 1 hour, like that. So that is what you should do. That is comes under the recovery. Then we have rehabilitation. Rehabilitation means, so before that we have done some losses and damage assessment. What is the total amount of money required for rehabilitation, which will be submitted to the government, both central and state government. They will release the funds based on the assessment report. Then we go for rehabilitation. What do you mean by rehabilitation? It may be long-term rehabilitation, wherein we take up housing and basic infrastructure facilities, etc., which may take 1 year. Sometimes, depending on the disaster, it may take more also. This is followed by reconstruction. Reconstruction includes even livelihood facilities. It is very long-term actually. So we say that build back better under the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, which was signed in 2015 in Sendai in Japan. So this rehabilitation reconstruction should go hand in hand. What was the situation before the disaster and how the situation should be better than before. We call it as build back better, and which is the priority under the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And we must construct better than before. Okay, that is the motive behind the reconstruction and rehabilitation. Next, this is the post-disaster situation, and this is the pre-disaster. Already I explained you what is prevention, what is mitigation, what is preparedness, and then there is a line drawn between these two stages. This is pre-disaster and this is post-disaster. So if you know these two stages, pre-disaster and post-disaster stages, you are well versed with disaster management. Now you can redefine what is disaster management. In this disaster management, this entire cycle is there. What is the cycle? Once disaster happens, then you take up search and rescue, then take up relief operations, go for recovery, do the rehabilitation, reconstruction, and then again we go for prevention, mitigation, and preparedness. These stages continue every year. Therefore, we are revising the disaster management plan every year in the district, in the Gram Panchayat, in the state. We resubmit it again and again. Why you do that? Because sometimes disasters magnitude intensity will change. This year it may be less, but next year it may be more. Or this year it may be more, next year it may be less. We do not know. So some losses, more number of people have died in this year, more number of injuries have happened this year, more losses and damages to the properties, economic losses have happened last 2 years continuously. Then we cannot go with the same trend. It may increase actually, it may be more next year. Therefore, we have to redesign and replan our disaster action plans at every level, starting from the Gram Panchayat, district, and state. That is what we are doing in the center here in our institution and in the government also. There is a Department of Disaster Management here in our state. Similarly, every state is having disaster management department, and they are doing this under the overall supervision of the State Disaster Management Authority, headed by the Chief Minister. So these stages, if you manage properly, that itself is a disaster management. Okay, both pre-disaster as well as post-disaster. So now I request you to tell me which stage is more important, which stage is less important. Can anybody tell me in this disaster management cycle?
Pre-disaster, sir.
Very nice. Why it is important?
Because we have to prevent before its occurrence, so that there is no losses of life.
Very good. Exactly. So instead of just sticking to the relief centric approach, we should also look into the proactive approach. Proactive approach means probability of disaster is already there, we know. Therefore, we need to take proactive measures like prevention, mitigation, and preparedness. So, from relief centric approach to preparedness, prevention, mitigation is the motive behind the Disaster Management Act 2005. It starts with this particular statement. Therefore, as you rightly said, preparedness, mitigation, prevention are more important as compared to the post-disaster activities. Okay, if you take them properly, if you prepare for them properly, if you prepare proper plans, if you prepare with all the capacities ready with the response, then automatically losses will be reduced, damages will also be reduced. Therefore, the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, SFDRR, which happened in 2015, India being the signatory of the SFDRR agreement, which is an international convention that took place in Sendai in 2015. We are also signatory to that. We agreed that every year we are going to reduce the disaster risk by taking measures like preparedness, mitigation, prevention, and losses of life, damages, injuries to the people per lakh population, deaths per lakh population, injured persons per lakh population, economic losses, etc., would be reduced every year, and we come to the zero losses by 2030. This is the agreement we signed with other countries. Total 196 countries have participated in that international convention, wherein we have all agreed to reduce the disaster risk to zero by 2030. On the similar lines, we had in 2015, there are two more international conventions. What are those? Sustainable Development Goals 2015 Agenda. Similarly, Paris Agreement 2015, which was signed. Both of them are also interlinked to the SFDRR convention. If these three international conventions are properly implemented by the countries and states and districts and local bodies in every country, automatically the disaster risk could reduce every year, and we would reach zero tolerance by 2030. That is the agenda, actually 2030 agenda from 2015 to 2030. So all of you must be aware of these things. Okay. Next, we will go to the next stage. Hope I think you are clear about this. Now, what is the global evidence for different disasters, whether they are increasing or decreasing? We see this is increasing, hydrometeorological disasters are increasing. What do you mean by hydrometeorological disaster? Water and climate related disasters like floods, droughts, storms. Why they are increasing? Now, lightning is also increasing. You may be surprised that more number of deaths are happening due to lightning itself, lightning and thunderstorms. Recent data from the National Crime Bureau says that the deaths in any disasters are compared to any disasters are more in case of lightning and thunderstorms. About 117 people, 130 people are dying every year in Karnataka itself. In some states, it is more also. Therefore, about 2,700 people are dying every year in lightning itself. Why is it happening? Maybe due to hydrometeorological conditions, global warming, climate change, etc. Similarly, floods are happening more and more. Most of the taluks are affected by floods in every state. Droughts are there. Drought, about 80% of our land is vulnerable to drought in Karnataka itself. And storms are there every year. So why extreme weather events are happening in India and other countries? Because of global warming, because of the changes in the hydrometeorological conditions. So all these are happening now. We need to be very, very careful. 81 countries, if you see the conditions here, you can see they have agreed in the climate conference recently, which was held in Glasgow. That is 27th COP, Conference of Parties, Climate Change Conference, where people have agreed. Like, these some of them have agreed to by 2050 we make it net zero carbon emission target. Some have agreed for 2070. Okay. So like that, target before 2050 is green, yellow, what is that, blue? Like Europe and some countries have agreed before 2050 they want to achieve net zero carbon emissions. So why they are doing this? Because hydrometeorological disasters are increasing. Therefore, they want to reduce the carbon emissions as early as possible. You can see the kind of hydrometeorological disasters, when natural disasters like earthquakes, etc. So a severity index during last 50 years data, if you see, most of the disasters you can see here, pests and diseases are increasing, cyclones are increasing, earthquake, flood, drought, cyclones. So all of them are there. So entire world is disaster prone, and India is no exception. Pakistan is no exception. Bangladesh is no exception. No country is exception. Every country is facing disasters, including USA. You can see the type of the events that have happened in India. So these are all the events: earthquakes, landslides, floods, cyclones, earthquakes in Latur. I was deputed to do some work in rehabilitation in Latur in 1993. I was part of the team. We went there and provided rehabilitation, earthquake-resistant housing rehabilitation there in 93 earthquake. I was in Delhi, therefore were in housing department, so they sent me there. So that was my first experience in any disaster. So like that, around the country, we see no state is free from disaster. If you see here, northeastern states, they are most vulnerable to landslide as well as earthquake because they are falling in zone 5 for earthquakes and landslides. Zone 5 is very high risk. So even Gujarat is see, Gujarat, Bhuj, that is also vulnerable to earthquake, which already happened in 2001. Most of about 13,800 people lost their lives. In Latur, when I went there, about 10,000 people died there, and later on many people died also due to injuries. We have already know tsunami 2004, which was never expected but happened. How many people died in that? 10,000 people lost their lives. Kerala flood recently, 1819. Kodagu flood in Karnataka. Not many people died, but Kodagu flood is happening every year now because of the landslides, flood due to heavy rainfall. Okay. So you can see that every country, every state is vulnerable to different disasters. This is, you can see in Mumbai flood, how it is. This is the problem here. You can see the kind of problem there. This is Belagavi flood in Karnataka. You can see almost all the area is vulnerable in Belagavi district. See how it is. Konkan railway bridge has collapsed due to heavy rainfall. What do we see here after these disasters, different types of disasters? Tsunami 2004, what do we see here? You can see the death, children and women, vulnerable groups, deaths, more number of deaths, more number of vulnerable people. Who are the most vulnerable? Men, children, aged. You can see the kind of dilapidation. This is a landslide. You can see how the entire thing is in Uttarakhand collapse. Even educational institution. This is a school fire incident actually in Kumbakonam, where 93 children were charged to death. Why? Later on, investigation has taken place. In the investigation, we found that teachers, the teachers, headmaster, the students were not aware of do's and don'ts during fire incident. So most of the students were sitting in the class without escaping. They were waiting for the instruction from the teacher, class teacher, but class teacher didn't give any instruction, so they were just sitting there in the classroom. Smoke came. Most of them ended up in the asphyxia, unconscious, so they died there inside the class. So this is the problem actually. They did not have any disaster management awareness, no plan, nothing. No mock drills have been conducted. Nothing was done. So as a result, almost all the children died there in that incident in the school. So if you see this, this is our own school in Mysore college, Maharani's college. This building was investigated by our team here in Mysore. Our engineering group went there from our ATI. We also went there. We found that this building was old. One reason is old building. Second reason is poor maintenance. Lot of stagnant water was there on the rooftop. Leaves, etc., were accumulated for a long time. Roots went inside the terrace as well as walls. On that particular fateful day, there was a heavy rainfall, and therefore the building just collapsed. Top floor, chemistry lab. So poor maintenance of the buildings would also lead to disasters to an educational institution. So you need to be very, very careful. That's what I said. If there are students inside the classroom, they would have died or injured. Fortunately, there were no students in the lab. So this type of incident happened in Nainital also. Nainital in Uttarakhand, where the school was running, one of the classrooms was not safe because of the landslide there. Some cracks developed. Some 20 children were dead in that fateful day due to heavy rainfall and landslide. Headmaster, BO, DDPI, and class teacher were present. They were punished after the incident. But they could have taken preventive measures by not conducting class in that particular room. But they continue to do that. Therefore, negligence, ignorance would also lead to loss of life and disaster. You can see here Uttaranchal. This is Uttarakashi. Every year there is a landslide there. So this is an example of how the natural disasters are happening. You have seen the Pralaya landslide in Uttarakhand a few years back. So who wants the hazard and who wants disaster? Do you lack knowledge, skills, resources, and more importantly, commitment? So commitment may comes from attitude. Our commitment will not be there if we have negative attitude. Our commitment will be there if you have positive attitude. That's all. So therefore, I told you already, risk is directly proportional to hazard, vulnerability, and exposure, and inversely proportional to capacity. I already told you. So you must know all these things. Okay, I have already defined what is disaster definition just now. While defining the terminologies, you can just recap it once again. A disaster means catastrophe, mishap, calamity, or grave occurrence affecting any area from natural or man-made causes or by accident or negligence, which results in substantial loss of life, human suffering, damage to and destruction of property, damage to or degradation of environment, and is of such a nature and magnitude as to be beyond the coping capacity of the local community of the area. So this is the definition we need to remember in India. This is the legal definition of disaster, and you need to go by this definition. There may be other definitions, international level definitions, and many other definitions are there. United Nations say that 12% might should have been dead, 100% should have been injured. So such incidents can be fit to be called as disasters. But here our definition is inclusive. It says that if the event is not manageable with their local support, with the local resources, whether it is natural or man-made, it results into loss, damage, and loss of life, both through the human beings as well as environment. Then such events can be fit to be called as disasters, which I already told you: level 1 type of disaster, level 2 type of disaster, and level 3 type of disasters. Okay. This is one presidential palace which was there in Haiti. After the earthquake, even the palace was damaged. You can see here. No building is free. When temples collapsed there, everything. When after 2 years they were doing this search and rescue operation there in Haiti, it is a Caribbean country. You can see the kind of fire taking place after the earthquake. So earthquake was followed by fire incidents there. So this is the problem. See how it was looking after the earthquake in Haiti. So what are the impacts there in disasters? We end up with physical impacts, educational impacts, economic impacts, and psychosocial impacts. I already told you what are the physical impacts. Like they get injured. Sometimes legs are amputated. There are many physical impacts. Our schools would be closed for so many days. Education will be disrupted. There will be a lot of economic impacts, like the forward and backward linkages will be broken. Livelihood activities will be stopped. Whatever they were doing at home-based economic activities will be stopped. When the industries, factories will be stopped for some time, they will be having a lot of problems in getting the wages and their livelihood activities. What do you mean by psychosocial impacts in disasters? And particularly, students will be suffering more in educational institutions during disasters like COVID-19. They have more mental problems than any other problem. So there was no school, there were no colleges. They were sitting at home, wearing all the mask and other things. Only online classes were conducted. Many of them were not understanding. So psychosocial impacts will be much more among the students, and particularly adolescents. Adolescents means those who are studying in colleges above 18 years. 18 years and above, adolescent students. They have more problems as much as children suffer. So these are the impacts, like any disasters will have on the students and other people. We have health impact. Everybody knows health impacts will be there as much as mental health. Mental health means they will suffer for a long time, whereas physical health problems, like they will suffer shorter. But mental health problems will continue for a long time. Suppose the parents have lost their children, they continue to suffer for a long time mentally. Similarly, children losing their parents, they will also suffer for a long time. So this is the problem actually in disasters. So there will be anxiety, fear, their child is regressive, difficulty in sleeping, concentrating. So we need to have some sort of activities like bringing them back to the normalcy by providing them some activities like externalization activities, uh, extracurricular activities like games, therapy, storytelling, meditation, yoga. All of them will help them in coming out of the trauma. You should also counsel them as a teacher. As a teacher, as a faculty member, you must know the counseling techniques like externalization, meditation, yoga, active listening, uh, and also social support, etc. If you don't know all these counseling techniques for the students, for the people who are suffering, there will be more losses and damages. As we've seen in the Latur earthquake, many people were suffering for a long time. There was no counseling, adequate counseling there, and many people died even after the disaster. Many people who were alive, but they died after some time due to the poor counseling by the authorities. So these things will happen. Therefore, we need to be very, very careful. So impacts could be special impacts. Child adoption will take place during flooding. Child labor will be increasing. Child trafficking also happens during COVID-19 like situations. Family problems will be there, more and more problems. What they were rich once yesterday, they become poor today after the disaster. So entire status will change. Some people will migrate from this place to the another town. So all these problems will be there in disaster, post-disaster impacts. So therefore, what should be the university or college or departmental responsibility to reduce the impact due to the disaster? We need to have a cool university disaster management plan. So what should be there in that? Should have a brief introduction about your educational institution, covering the population working there, students there, what kind of students are there, how many types of classrooms are there, all that, library, labs, etc. Then you conduct a hazard risk vulnerability analysis. Where are the hazard? How many type of hazards are there within the boundary of the educational institution? From outside the boundary of the educational institution, what are all the hazards like electricity related or communal violence related, road accident related, snakes, or any sports related or festival related, communal violence, drowning, or flood, landslide, earthquake, etc. So you have to identify all of those hazards from outside the boundary, from inside the boundary. From inside the boundary, there may be hazards like classroom itself is not good, not safe. Chemistry lab itself is not in well, not kept properly. Library is prone to fire. So like that. So you have to identify all of them. Okay, then you have to risk how much it is, vulnerability how much it is. Then you have to analyze all of that. Prepare the maps, vulnerability maps. Then prepare accordingly. So preparedness includes formation of teams, giving them all the every team should be trained in first aid, search and rescue, fire extinguishing, etc. Then you have to develop some important resources like first aid kit, then first aid room. Then we have to have stretchers, minimum facilities like stretchers, boats if there is a flood, life jackets. Then you should also have some fire extinguishers in the building. You should also be trained. If they are trained, then they will be able to. These teams will be able to work during the disaster. So response will be better only if we prepare properly. Okay. So response teams will be there. They will act accordingly. So then mitigation measures. So if you do all these important stages, even contact addresses also you have to write at the end. Overall supporting you during the like fire service department, civil defense, home guards, police, district disaster management authority like DC, SP, then NDRF, SDRF, So all of those addresses should be there. So at the bottom, even private bodies also sometimes, like factories and all, who can help you during the disaster. Okay.